She sent the text at 7:14 in the morning. I know the exact time because I was standing at the kitchen counter, still in my robe, waiting for the coffee to finish. My phone buzzed against the tile and I picked it up without thinking. Plans have changed. You're not needed for the cottage weekend. Robbie and I want it to be just family. I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on the counter and listened to the coffee drip. Just family. I had paid for that cottage. I had paid for the down payment on the property, the new dock they put in 2 summers ago, the septic repairs last fall that ran close to $14,000. I had driven 4 hours in February with my son-in-law to inspect the place before they bought it. Just family. And I was not it. I poured my coffee. I didn't respond to the text. Let me back up a bit. I'm 63 years old. I retired early from a civil engineering firm in Mississauga where I'd worked for 27 years. My wife passed away 8 years ago. Breast cancer, quick and brutal, gone in 10 months. After she died, I spent 2 years barely functioning, then 2 more years finding my footing again. My daughter was the one who pulled me back. She called every Sunday without fail. She brought food when I forgot to eat. She sat with me in the house that felt too quiet and didn't try to fill the silence with noise. I owe her more than I can say. So when she married Robbie 6 years ago, I was happy for her. Genuinely happy. Robbie was loud and confident, the kind of man who entered a room like he'd already been invited. He sold commercial real estate and did well enough, or said he did. My daughter was a nurse. Between the 2 of them they got by, but getting by in the Greater Toronto area is harder than it sounds, and after their first child was born and my daughter cut back her hours, things got tight. I helped. Of course I helped. That's what you do. It started small, a few thousand to cover a slow month. Then it became regular. I helped with the mortgage top-up when rates went up in 2023. I bought the minivan they needed when my second grandchild came. I co-signed on the cottage because Robbie's credit had some old issues he said were being resolved. I transferred money into my daughter's account without making a fuss about it. I told myself it was for the children, for the family, and I meant that sincerely. What I didn't see, or maybe didn't want to see, was how the arrangement had quietly rearranged the furniture of our relationship. I had become, without anyone saying so, the bank. Not the grandfather, not the father. The bank that drove 4 hours to inspect properties and co-signed documents and wrote checks and was thanked warmly and promptly forgotten until the next thing was needed. I told myself I was imagining it. I'm not the kind of man who keeps score. My wife used to say that about me. She'd say, "You give without a ledger, and that's either your best quality or your worst. I haven't decided yet." I'd laugh when she said it. I wasn't laughing anymore. The cottage had become theirs in a way that confused me. I was on the ownership documents. I had contributed more than anyone else to buying the thing. But the invitations came when they came, and sometimes they didn't come at all. The summer before, I'd found out through a photo on Instagram, my grandchildren running on the dock, grinning, the lake behind them, that they'd spent a long weekend there without mentioning it to me. I said nothing. I told myself they needed their own space. The text that morning was different. Just family. I finished my coffee. I went upstairs and had a shower. I stood under the water longer than usual, thinking about nothing in particular, which is often when I do my clearest thinking. By the time I came back downstairs, I knew what I was going to do. I didn't call my daughter. I didn't text back. I called my lawyer instead. His name is a man I've trusted since my wife's estate was settled, and he picked up on the second ring. I explained the situation, the co-signing, the financial contributions, the ownership structure of the cottage property. He listened without interrupting. Then he said, "Give me until end of day." While I waited, I went through my files. I'm organized by nature. Decades in engineering will do that, and I had everything. The ownership documents, the transfer records, the bank statements showing every contribution I'd made over the past 4 years. I made photocopies of everything that mattered and put them in a folder. Then I sat down at my kitchen table and wrote out, by hand, a full accounting of what I had contributed to my daughter and her husband's household since the marriage. The total surprised even me. It was not a small number. I made myself lunch, a cheese sandwich. I sat at the table and ate it while the light moved across the floor and the house stayed quiet around me. My lawyer called back at 4:15. He told me what I needed to know. Given my position on the title, given the documented contributions, I had options. Not aggressive options. I wasn't interested in doing damage, but real options. Ones that would make my position unmistakably clear. I thanked him. I told him to begin. What I did next was not dramatic. There was no confrontation, no raised voices, no text back that said something I would later regret. What I did was methodical and quiet, the way I have always done things that matter. I contacted the bank and removed myself from the joint account I shared with my daughter, the one I'd set up specifically to help with household costs. I arranged to transfer my share of the cottage title into a holding situation that my lawyer structured so that any future decisions about the property would require my explicit consent. I reviewed the mortgage arrangement I had guaranteed and spoke with the bank's legal department about my position, and I composed a formal letter, typed, printed, signed, to my daughter and her husband, advising them that effective immediately, my financial support was suspended, that I was reviewing all legal arrangements I had entered into on their behalf, and that I would be in touch through my lawyer. Then I drove to my brother's place in Barrie. He doesn't know I'm coming most of the time, and he's never minded. We sat on his back deck until the sun went down, and he asked me what happened, and I told him. He didn't say much, just listened, like he's always done. His wife brought out tea and quietly went back inside, the way she does when she knows the men in the family need to sort something out. He said, "Did she know what she was sending when she sent that?" I said, "I don't think she understood what she had." He nodded slowly. We watched the lake behind his property go dark. I didn't hear from my daughter until the following Thursday. 6 days of silence. I won't pretend that didn't cost me something. It did. Those were not easy days. I walked in the mornings. I worked in the garden. I reread a book I've had since university, one my wife had given me. I kept busy because keeping busy is how I have always managed the things I cannot control. When she did call, she was upset. Not in the way I expected. She wasn't angry, exactly. She was frightened. She asked me what was happening, why her access to the joint account was gone, why they'd received correspondence from my lawyer. Her voice was shaking. I listened to her. I let her finish. Then I said, "Do you remember the text you sent me last Tuesday morning?" Silence. "You said I wasn't needed for the cottage weekend, that you and Robbie wanted it to be just family." I paused. I'm trying to understand what family means in this arrangement. More silence. She started to explain. "The cottage weekend," she said, "was because Robbie's parents were coming from Edmonton and she thought it would be less complicated without." She stopped herself. She knew how it sounded. I said, "I co-signed that property. I paid for the dock. I paid for the septic system. I have a legal interest in that cottage, and I found out through a text message that I'm not welcome for a weekend because it would be less complicated." Is that right? She didn't answer directly. She said she hadn't thought about it that way. She said she was sorry. She said Robbie had suggested she send the text and that she should have pushed back. That stopped me. Robbie suggested it. She said yes, he'd thought it would be easier to just handle the weekend without extra people around. Extra people. I sat with that for a moment. I told her I loved her. I told her that was not in question, not for a single second, and I needed her to understand that. But I also told her something I should have said years earlier, that I had been contributing to her household in the way that I had because I loved her and my grandchildren. Not because I expected anything in return, but that love was not the same as invisibility. That there was a version of giving that worked for everyone and a version that trained people to see you as a resource instead of a person. And somewhere along the way, we had drifted toward the second version, she cried. I let her. I asked her to come see me, alone without Robbie, just the two of us. She agreed. She came on a Saturday. She brought my grandson with her, which I hadn't expected, and the sight of him running from the car to the front door did something to me that I am not going to try to describe. We had lunch. We talked for 3 hours. At some point, my grandson fell asleep on the couch, and we sat at the kitchen table and talked the way we used to when she was younger. Carefully, honestly, like two people who both understood what was at stake. She told me things I hadn't known, that Robbie had been struggling more than he let on, that the real estate market had been hard on him for the past 2 years, that money in their house had become a source of tension, and that Robbie had, more than once, made comments about how much they depended on me in a way that had made her feel ashamed. Not about me, about the dependence. I understood that more than she expected me to. I said, the shame should have gone toward finding a solution, not toward hiding me on a weekend. She nodded. We talked about what came next, not the legal arrangement. That could be sorted out between the lawyers in its own time. And I was not interested in punishing anyone. What I wanted to sort out was the real thing. How I was going to be present in this family, and in what capacity, going forward. I told her that I would continue to be there for her and my grandchildren, that I would not simply vanish from her life, but I was also going to be honest about what I could and could not carry, and I was going to stop pretending that my presence in their lives was a thing that could be budgeted for, scheduled, or edited out of a cottage weekend when it wasn't convenient. She said she understood. I said, I need to know that you understand. Not just that you're saying it. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, I forgot that you're a person too, Dad. Not just a dad. A person. I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. I just reached across the table and put my hand on hers, and we sat like that for a while. Things moved slowly after that, the way things do when real repair is happening instead of surface repair. Robbie and I did not speak for several weeks. My daughter told me he was embarrassed. Not in a productive way initially, but she said he was thinking. She said he had spoken to someone, a counselor, which surprised me. I had not expected that from him. He called me on a Sunday evening in November. I picked up. He was quieter than I had ever heard him. The big room-filling confidence was gone, replaced by something more careful. He said he owed me an apology. He said the text message had been his idea and that it was wrong, and that he'd been taking things for granted in a way he hadn't fully understood until the accounting landed on his desk from my lawyer. I let him say all of it. Then I said, I appreciate that. I mean it. There was a pause. I said, I'm not interested in burning anything down, Robbie. But I'm also 63 years old. I buried my wife. I have worked a long time and contributed a lot, and I'd like the years I have left to feel like something more than a service I provide. Do you understand what I mean? He said yes. He sounded like he meant it. My lawyer and I eventually restructured the cottage arrangement so that my ownership stake was formalized in writing, including my right of access and consultation on any major decisions. It wasn't adversarial. It was just clear. My daughter and her husband agreed to it without argument. The financial support changed shape too. I still help. I'm not a man who can simply stop caring, but I help differently now. Specific things, clearly framed, for my grandchildren's education accounts, for things we've agreed on together, not quiet transfers into accounts that feel like covering something up. This past summer, I spent 10 days at the cottage. My daughter was there with the children, and Robbie came up on the weekends. On the Saturday evening of the second weekend, we sat on the dock, all of us, and watched the sun go down over the water. My grandson had his fishing rod out, not catching anything, very committed to the effort. My daughter was sitting beside me, her shoulder leaning against mine a little, the way she used to lean against me when she was 8 years old and we'd watch television after dinner. Robbie handed me a beer without being asked and sat down on my other side. Nobody said anything for a while. Then my grandson said, "Granddad, why don't fish just eat the worm and leave?" And I said, "Because they get curious, buddy, and sometimes curious gets you caught." Robbie laughed first, then my daughter, then me. The lake was very still. The light on it was the kind of orange that my wife used to call the good hour. I don't know if she made that up or heard it somewhere. It sounds like something she would have made up. I thought about her. I thought about all the years and all the money and all the quiet driving and the documents signed and the conversations I should have had sooner. I thought about the text message that started this, 7 words on a Tuesday morning, and how something that small had been enough to shift something that needed shifting. I didn't feel angry anymore. I hadn't for a while. I just felt like myself, which, it turns out, was the thing I'd been waiting to feel for quite some time.